Welcome in. It is Big Ten today. We are presented by Gatorade. Great to have you with us on this Friday. Dave Revson, Dave Wannstedt, counting down to the beginning of the season. It's exciting stuff.
No turning back now. Right here we go. That's what we used to say. You get to this point, it's here really. But it's so exciting, because we had talked before. Everybody's feeling real good about their team. I mean, the freshmen are faster than you thought they were,
yes.
Right? They're smarter than they were. The veterans got stronger. The transfers, how did they let this guy get away? That's the thoughts and that's the conversations in the coaches' rooms. But the real key is, when you get this close, Rever, you have to make sure that the most important part of your team now becomes, I hate to use the word scout team, but your opponent plays, because now you're going to start running the plays, offense, defense, and special teams that the other teams are going to run. So it's important to make sure that it's just not the starters, that the last guy on that roster is motivated and all in to help you win.
I want to dive into that, get a little more on that in just a moment. Our big story is the anticipation of Week 1. A reminder of that Week 1 schedule, just 6 days until Nebraska and Minnesota. We'll take a deep dive into that one later in the show. Michigan State plays on Friday. Saturday is obviously the biggest day. You've got 8 games, conference clash between Ohio State and Indiana. Even have a game on Sunday, Rutgers hosting Northwestern. Coach, I want to get a little bit more into what you were just talking about there, and you were saying that the scout team. I think for people who haven't been around a football team in the way that you have for years and years and years, understanding the transition between breaking camp, like camp is over,
right,
and now we start working on an opponent. How does that work? Is there a specific day where you say, okay, this is it, we're turning the page? How do you communicate that to the players? Like, what's the difference?
Well, I thought that you always had to be careful. When did you start working on the opponent? And I don't care if you're playing a lesser opponent or if you're playing a top 10 team. This part of breaking camp was consistent in my mind. And we would always try to do it about 10 days out, because what can happen is once you break camp and now it's time for the season and we're going to start our preparation a little bit differently. Now it's not going to be the first against the first type of thing. Now it's going to be against the opponents. It's Minnesota versus Nebraska. That's where our focus goes. You can start that too soon, Rever. So I always thought that...
What do you mean? What would happen if you started too soon?
Well, the guys get bored.
Okay.
Because the coaches have the game plan. They've been looking at these guys in the summer. So we're studying the tape. Minnesota's studying Nebraska, back and forth. So they know what they want to put in. And they're so excited to get it to the players.
Right.
And the players are so excited to start working on Minnesota plays if you're in Nebraska and vice versa. So, it's real critical that you don't get to game week and it's Wednesday and you are mentally bored. Bobby Bowden, the late Coach Bowden used to always say, hey, it's physical the first couple days, okay? Let's get their runs done. Let's be physical at practice. But then the last 3 or 4 days, it's all up here. So you got to be real careful that you don't start peaking too early, and now all of a sudden Thursday comes and you're having to motivate your team to get that energy to get going.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that Week 1 is unique, right? Because once you get into the season, you kind of have the same routine, right? Every Sunday is the same, every Monday is the same, unless you're playing on an odd day, unless you have a Friday night game or what have you. But this first week you handle differently than the others.
Yeah, and another thing that I would always decide, and I always like to do it early, you're putting in the game plan. If I run a fake punt on you the first game of the season, everybody the radon is going to be working on that, and they're going to be spending time with that. So we would always look at it and say, okay, let's do a couple things the first week, okay? And you always want, if you're going to run trick plays, you always have to beat the opposing coach. So I always wanted to run my fakes and tricks early in the game, okay? Because usually he's not going to do it. If you run a fake punt and I'm thinking about it, and I'm saying, that guy just ran a fake punt. I'm not going to do it now. I'll wait till the next week. So I always wanted to beat him to the punch. But, there's different philosophies. Some coaches like to wait and wait and wait for the perfect opportunity. I've done that and used something 2 or 3 times during the season, but I always liked right out of the chute to give them something unusual. And I think a lot has to do with who you're opening with too, Rever.
Well, let's talk about that, because I am interested in that and whether the philosophy is different. And you were saying to me earlier when we were talking before the show, you said, hey, I've opened Notre Dame, I've opened with Akron. I'm sure no disrespect to Akron, but it's different.
Sure.
When you're opening with Notre Dame. And I think when you look down the list in the Big Ten, no disrespect to Towson, but that's who Maryland's opener is. And take out the conference games, because the conference games obviously are a different beast. But that's really different than, say, Purdue opening with a Fresno State team that won the Mountain West a season ago, and Purdue's got a new coach and all that. I mean, that's a serious, challenging, big-time game. So how is it different for you depending on the quality of your opponent?
I always, there's 2 sides to it, because there's no preseason games. So you have to make sure that you're getting all your your scrimmaging done, obviously, beforehand. Because once the lights go on, obviously what you have is you're going to find out when it counts, wins and losses. So, I kind of there was always something about opening with a good opponent, because you got it in the locker room. We're opening with Notre Dame. There's 15 days left. We're counting down the days. You've seen the clocks in the locker room. They count the hour to the hour to the hour. And everybody's focused on that. So it's easier for a coach, in my opinion. And that they're not going to try to do anything crazy. If you're playing a team of Ohio State, Michigan, hey, they're going to come out and they're going to play their football. They're not going to, where if you're playing a lesser opponent, now all of a sudden we got to be ready for the fake punt. Yeah. We got to be ready for the unbalanced line. I mean, we got to be ready for a spread set, even though they've never done a spread set. So it drives coaches crazier. I always thought opening with a lesser opponent, even though you have the better team and you should win. There was a part of me that always said, hey, let's start with somebody tough and let's get focused on this thing. Hey, and the other thing too, the players start reading the press clippings and the fans read it. God forbid you open with somebody, they think you're going to win by 3 touchdowns. God forbid you kick a field goal with no time left. They think you lost. You know what I mean? So you're dealing with players' psyche if it's a lesser opponent. You're dealing with the fans, the alumni. All that stuff goes into it, I thought.
But it does sound like, you were saying, hey, running a fake punt. It does sound like if you're playing a lesser opponent, part of what you can start thinking about is, okay, I'm Ohio State, and maybe a bad example, they're playing Indiana, but let's say I'm Michigan, they're playing East Carolina, and you say to yourself, all right, like maybe we will throw a fake punt in, not because we're trying to trick East Carolina, but because we're trying to give Ohio State something that they have to worry about. So it feels like there are ways to take advantage of either situation, right?
Absolutely. And the other point, I'm sitting here thinking as we're talking, the opening games, you want to get your freshmen and your young players involved on special teams. You mentioned that. I'm sitting here thinking, what did I use? But here's the fine line. You put a young freshman or a transfer kid in there on that punt team, and you get a punt blocked. You know what I'm saying? I mean, so there's a fine line. Punt returns, you can't let the ball hit the ground. I would never. Everybody says, this guy's the most talented freshman punt returner. Not for me in the opening game, he's not. I'd put my quarterback back there if he was going to catch. No, if he was going to catch the ball.
Yeah.
And I was always probably a little bit conservative that way. But I think, you want to get the freshmen on the field. You recruited these kids. They're excited. You promised them they're going to play. Mom and dad, they're at the game. Here we go. And you stick them in there, and it's a different level.
Right.
So, dealing with the younger and the newer players at the same time, trying to balance that and manage that is a real key.
How is it different if you're a first-time head coach? So we've got 4 new coaches in the Big Ten, but you've really got 2 different examples. You have Matt Rule and Luke Fickell, who are experienced head coaches, been there, done that. And you got Ryan Walters and David Braun, who've never done this before, never been a head coach. So how is it different in that first game if you're the experienced guy versus the inexperienced guy?
Well, the experienced guy has had a penalty. I'm inside the 50 and we get an offsides penalty. Am I going to take the penalty to 5 yards, or am I going to decline it and put him in a long yardage situation? So an experienced head coach is gone through that part of the game. An experienced head coach has a gut feeling how he wants to handle halftime and how he's going to approach halftime with his assistants and with the players. So those type of things, an experienced player as compared to inexperienced. But I'll tell you what, even look at, you use Matt Rule, his offensive coordinator, Marcus Satterfield, right?
Satterfield, yep.
He was with him, assistant coaches. Now, there's no preseason game. The defensive coordinator, Tony White, is new. Arizona State, Syracuse. Him and Matt have never worked together. They're practicing together. There's no preseason games. His offensive coordinator, they were together at Baylor. They were together at Carolina. So he knows, they speak the same language. And, now all of a sudden you got a defensive coordinator, and yeah, you have the game plan. Sure, you have the game plan. But as the game's going on, and now it's the third, fourth quarter, and we get into a situation, and Matt's thinking defend, and Tony's thinking pressure. You know what I mean? That's what you got to work through too. So you can be an experienced head coach and you can feel good about all the mechanics of the games,
right.
The penalties, what I'm going to challenge, when I'm going to go for two. I've done it before. There's things you learn. I got beat in a game one time. We were on a goal line and it was 4th and 1, and I threw the ball, and I told my coaches, until I'm not coaching anymore, if it's 4th and 1, we will get up under center and run a quarterback sneak on the first sound, and I don't give a darn who knows it.
Yeah.
And then after that, we were about 75% successful with it.
Right.
And just get up there and let's go.
Let's just go.
So my point is, you learn things that way, but what you really don't know, if you're even an experienced head coach, you got a new guy calling the plays. And in the heat of the battle, it takes some time sometimes, to get on the same page as far as what you're going to call in a pressure situation right on the spot.
Will be interesting to watch those new coaches. Then you throw Jesse Minter in, who has the responsibilities game one for Michigan, with Jim Harbaugh being suspended, taking the self-imposed suspension. You may have seen the announcement yesterday. Michigan, a few different coaches involved.
Jim's going to be there Friday night running the meeting.
Yeah, it's different. But again, when it's 4th and 1, if they were in a pressure situation.
His dad will be there. Don't worry.
Yeah, you got the experienced hand and Jack Harbaugh. It's, they got a lot of different combinations and permutations going on there in Ann Arbor. Back on Big Ten today, these schools have yet to officially name a starting QB. It's a list that includes Indiana, Michigan State, Northwestern, and Penn State, though I think we'd all be astonished if it's not Drew Aller in State College. Ohio State's battle's getting a ton of attention. Cal McCord and Devin Brown battling to replace C.J. Stroud. And Coach, before we dive into the specifics, I feel like it's somewhat anecdotal. I don't know that we've tracked this going back 10 years, 20 years, but does it feel like there's more quarterback battles going down to the wire? And if you agree with the premise, why do you think that is?
I do, and it's got to be the transfer portal, because these coaches in the past, if you recruited a kid and then you recruited a younger player to take his place, they were kind of this very similar style, coming out of the same program, the same ability level. But now all of a sudden you're getting, at some of these top programs, you're getting an opportunity to get a transfer player that might not be he might not be as good a passer as what the kid that you have, but he's a heck of an athlete. And coaches hate to pass up those opportunities. So now I think what you see is, as a head coach, if you're going to get one of these top players, you don't want the current guy who you have there to leave. So I think that you got to manage the roster would be the word. And how do you do that? What's the reasoning behind it? One, you really want to get this new player, this younger player, an opportunity to get some looks, But at the same time, selfishly, you don't want him to transfer. I mean, look at Michigan last year. I mean, Jim Harbaugh went into the season with Cade and with JJ, and I think if he would have come out, in August and said, JJ's my guy, Cade would have probably left then, and no one would have blamed him. So I think as a head coach, you're trying to manage it. At the same time, you're trying to evaluate what gives you the best chance to win. And at the same time, selfishly a little bit, you don't want to lose a good player that you're going to probably need at some point in the season.
And a different balancing act, too, when you can have players join you after spring practice.
Yeah.
Oh, so absolutely. All of a sudden, you've got another player thrown in because that guy wasn't happy where he was previously and decides to make a move. So you've got even more variables in play than you did previously when it was spring practice. You knew, okay, it's down to these two guys.
And you've heard me say this, the quickest way to be defeated is to be distracted. A week before training camp, no head coach wants his backup quarterback to say, I'm leaving.
Yes.
And now it's a media frenzy, and now you're dealing with that, and the players in the locker room. No, that's a recipe for disaster.
Let's dive into a few of the specifics here. I do find Ohio State to probably be the most interesting one. Is it your sense with McCord and Brown that this might go into the season? I mean, I guess I look at it as you got to know by the Notre Dame game who your guy is, right? But you got 3 games before that. Or do you think that ultimately Ryan Day makes a decision here in the next 6 days?
I don't know if he'll come out and say it, but I got to believe that McCord's going to be the guy. I mean, he's got some playing experience. He knows the offense. But I know for a fact that Ryan Day is really intrigued and likes what Devin Brown brings to the table. So a little bit like I was talking about, before that. And think about what Ryan's looking at. Okay, he's going back and he's saying, okay, I had Dwayne Haskins. Okay, then I go to the runner of Justin Fields. Then I got the passer in C.J. Stroud. So I see this in him. He's got Fields' running ability. He's got Stroud's passing ability. So you're trying to put it all together and manage it. Plus, he's a young player. One kid's a redshirt freshman, Brown. So you sure as heck don't want him transferring. So I would bet. I know Ryan said it, let's draw straws. It's a split decision. I don't believe that's the case. I really don't. But I do think that they'll probably play them both. I really expect them both to play early leading up to that Notre Dame game, but I think that at the end, McCord's the guy.
Agree with you. I'd be surprised if we only see one of them. And not just if it's a blowout, and I think some of these games are going to be blowouts, but in meaningful snaps early in the game, because that's the way to really figure it out. I mean, that's the weird thing, too. You go to camp and the quarterbacks aren't live, and is it different when the quarterback's live? It'd be the first time really to see him in that situation. So there's so many variables that go in.
And everybody needs to think about the talent that's surrounding these quarterbacks, right? At tight end, receiver, running back, offensive line. If you're a quarterback and you're starting the season off at Ohio State, make good decisions. McCord knows that. Get the ball out to where you're supposed to.
Throw it to Marvin.
And get it out and get it out quick. And you're going to put up good numbers. You should be successful. So I think that gives McCord an advantage too, because he's going to get the first shot.
I mentioned the Penn State job is still technically open, just in that James Franklin was given an opportunity to say, is Drew Aller your starting quarterback, and didn't come out and say it. Now, that might be partly because Neil Brown hasn't announced his starter at West Virginia. Maybe there's some gamesmanship there. But I do know that he really likes Bo Prabula, and you can see why. When we were at camp, you can see why he likes him. Is there... do you believe there's an advantage to kind of playing it this way publicly, even if people internally might know what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, they have to, because West Virginia is going to have to prepare for both, up to some degree. But usually you find out. I mean, people talk, reporter. I mean, they find out, and I agree with you too that Aller's going to be the guy. Allers will be the guy, and he's got the experience. He was the guy that they used in situations last year behind Sean Clifford. So, James knows that he can win with this kid. And I think it's a little bit like we were talking about in the open here. Check the boxes, manage him, don't let him transfer, but because we know the backup's got talent.
He does, indeed. No, he's a really good player, but Aller is, you can see why. He was a 5-star. everyone in the country wanted him. And as you say, stepping into some big shoes. I mean, Sean Clifford's their all-time leading passer. Michigan State is an interesting one because of the departure of Peyton Thorne in the spring. Certainly from the outside, it felt unexpected. And so now all of a sudden you fast forward things a little bit. They have really spoken highly of Noah Kim for years. I mean, last couple of years we've been going there. Mel Tucker said this kid's going to be really, really good. But now all of a sudden, maybe a year earlier than you thought, he could be your starter, or Caton Hauser, who's a highly recruited, talented kid. What's the balancing act here for Tucker in what he hopes will be a bounce-back year after some disappointment last year?
Exactly. Yeah, Michigan State, look back at their history, current history, and they've gone through this, I think, 2 times in the last 3 years where they've had quarterback competitions. Peyton Thornton won it a couple years ago, went on to win 11 games, and now he's gone, So, yeah, I mean, Noah Kim, he's a holdover from Mark D'Antonio's regime, going back that far. Hauser, probably a little better athlete, Elite 11 from California. So Mel's doing this balancing act too. Here's the difference. You don't want to jinx anybody, but you got Central Michigan and you got Richmond. That's their first 2 games. I think Mel Tucker, if he's got good enough confidence in his run game and his defense, you could legitimately go in with these 2 opponents and say you're each going to play a half, or maybe one starts one game. If the competition is this close, and I don't know if it is, if it's this close where you're having a tough time making a decision, you could play each one in one of these games, and it'll be clear to everybody. We'll be able to tell you who the best quarterback is. So I think you'll play them both because of the opening part of the season.
It would help to have a good run game, too. And I think that was a huge issue last year, was the drop-off in the run game from Kenneth Walker III. And, they sing the praises of Noah Kim, and they say he's one of the faster guys on the team, so maybe he can help in the run game as well. You talk about Hauser also being a good athlete. So maybe quarterback run becomes a bigger part of what they do, just given the personnel and the fact that they haven't been as good in terms of the backs. Indiana, Taven Jackson comes over from Tennessee. Obviously, the relationship to Trace Jackson-Davis, the great basketball player, I think has Indiana fans excited. You got Brendan Sorsby, who was there a year ago, saw very limited action. I can tell you that when we were there, this was one that just wasn't clear who the guy was. There was no one who really stood out as you clearly have to go with him. It's a big year for Tom Allen as well. What do you do in this situation?
Yeah, 23 transfer portal new players come to the team, and you would like to think that your transfer quarterback would be one of those guys. It's a tough situation because he won't be opening, playing Ohio State. I mean, you're not going to have wiggle room, and you don't want to come out the first game and feel like you've made the wrong decision. So this is a tough one. I don't know. I haven't seen both of these guys play yet, so Tom Allen, obviously, he's feeling some pressure, and you hope he makes the right decision.
I think the one real positive for them is that Dexter Williams, who was hurt late last year, is ahead of schedule in his recovery, and Tom Allen expects to see him at some point this year. He adds a really nice dimension in the run game, so I know it doesn't help you against Ohio State, but maybe it helps you a little bit down the line. I wanted to touch on Northwestern as well. They got a good transfer in Ben Bryant. He has started at Eastern Michigan. He has started at Cincinnati. You've got Ryan Helinski, who started at South Carolina and Northwestern. You have Brendan Sullivan, who started at Northwestern. They just made so many mistakes last year at the quarterback position. To me, this doesn't seem like a terrible group, but you've got to find someone to step up.
I don't have a cliche. There's the old one, if you got 2 quarterbacks, you don't have one.
What about if you have 3?
I want 3. I mean, I've got to think about that. But no, in all seriousness, there is some talent there, and there's some experience there. I totally agree with you. And you feel a little better about the surrounding support, whether it be receivers or offensive line and running game, than maybe I do at this point. But that'll be the key. Whichever quarterback gets chosen, this cannot be, how good our quarterback is how good our football team is going to be. I mean, they're probably not going to win the conference championship. They'd like to, but I think you got to get a quarterback that can function and take advantage of the supporting cast you have.
Just cannot turn it over. I mean, 30 turnovers last year. It was just astounding, the most in the Power 5. So if you got someone who can take care of the ball, I'd say you go with him. Our big stat brought to you by Gatorade. For the 10th time in the last 30 years, we have a returning Heisman winner. This time it's USC QB Caleb Williams, who accounted for 52 touchdowns last year. Followed his coach Lincoln Riley from Oklahoma. As you are likely aware, none of these players has won a second Heisman. Ohio State's Archie Griffin still the only one to pull that off. Williams and the Trojans kick off their season tomorrow evening against San Jose State at the Coliseum. They are a prohibitive favorite. SC, as you'll recall, 11-3 a season ago, a 7-win improvement. Made the Cotton Bowl where they fell to Tulane. Antonio Morales covers the Trojans for The Athletic. He is today's big interview, and he joins us now. Antonio, really appreciate your time. Let's start for the Big Ten audience, just kind of big picture here. As we mentioned, an 11-win team a year ago after winning 4 the previous year. So Lincoln Riley really turned it around in year 1. Is it fair to say, when you throw in a Heisman winner as well, that there are some pretty good vibes right now around the USC program? Give us a sense of how everyone's feeling.
I think this is the highest expectations have been since Pete Carroll left in the late 2000s, I think. People are really excited about this team just based off of what they accomplished last season. I don't think they knew really what to expect last year when it was 20 new players and 7 new freshmen and just a whole new roster, basically. So I think people were a little not hesitant, but just waiting to see what the product was going to look like. And then they started off 11-1 and were on the doorstep of the playoff. And I think that really got fans to buy in that run they went on to start the year. And Caleb Williams winning the Heisman, and he's back. And the moves they made in the transfer portal to try to improve the defense and the skill players they have surrounding Caleb, I think there's a lot of hype and a lot of excitement for this team. Number 6 in the country, obviously, to start the year. And I think fans are expecting a playoff and a Pac-12 championship.
How has Williams handled the spotlight? Give us a little insight into him as a person, and obviously we know what a great player he is, but just kind of how he's handled all the hoopla.
Yeah, he came in with a lot of hype last year too, but obviously this is different. You're the Heisman Trophy winner, and that's just a different sort of attention, a different sort of notoriety. And he's been doing well this offseason. Obviously, he's very calculated in how he handles stuff and very measured and things like that. And he's still that way. He hasn't really changed much. I think last year what impressed me was how he integrated himself within the team. This was a program that he wasn't a part of the year before. He hadn't gone through all the losses when they went 4-8 in 2021. But he acted like, he integrated himself in the team, and his teammates rallied behind him. And I think he's kind of got that same sense of leadership this year. And for the Heisman Trophy winner, that's the kind of face USC needs for its program as it tries to put itself on more stable footing after a tough decade.
You mentioned the defense, and it was the defense that really kept them out of the playoff last year. Alex Grinch is the defensive coordinator. He is well respected throughout college football. You talked about them bringing in players through the portal, and I know the sense is that will help a lot. Is there belief in the system? Like, is the thought that this is more of a personnel issue than it is an X and O issue, or do you believe that they will in some way tweak the X's and O's this year?
That's what everybody's waiting on. There was a good case to be made. Last year's issues were personnel related. They had really struggled on defense in 2021. A lot of that core was back in Lincoln Riley's first year. They added some guys in the portal, but they weren't like guys who were starters at other schools. And it showed over the course of the year. The personnel was still largely the same, and a lot of the same mistakes, the bad tackling, the miscommunication, all that stuff was the same. And this year they brought in starters from Purdue, Jack Sullivan. Anthony Lucas was a top 50 prospect who went to A&M before he transferred to USC. Keon Bars was all Pac-12, and starter at Arizona. These are guys who played at other schools. Bear Alexander was in the rotation at Georgia last year in the playoff, in the national title game. So those are 4 guys who just completely changed that defensive line and the talent level and the size that they didn't have last year. And they bring in Mason Cobb from Oklahoma State, who was second team All Big 12. So I think there's a possibility the front 6, the defensive front, could start 6 new players on Saturday against San Jose State. And we're going to find out, was this a scheme issue or was this a personnel issue? And Lincoln Riley said there's no excuses for them not to be great on defense this year. So the pressure is really on Alex Grinch. The spotlight's on him this year to kind of make things better. So USC can get over the hump and win the Pac-12 and reach the playoff.
Zooming out bigger picture on SC, they hired Jen Cohen as the AD this week. She actually comes from Washington, another future Big Ten member. Clearly the biggest order of business is transitioning to the Big Ten. I know that's been in the works now for a year at USC. Aside from that, what are kind of the major orders of business for Jen Cohen as she starts leading this program?
NIL obviously will be a big topic, a big thing for her to tackle. USC, I know some USC fans would be like, oh, they were kind of slow or kind of falling behind other schools in NIL. I think they're on stable ground now. They have that House of Victory collective that's done pretty well. So just like having the foresight and the energy to kind of tackle that will be a big thing. And obviously maintaining and building a relationship with Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley is somebody who has only worked for 2 ADs before, Mike Bone and Joe Castiglione at Oklahoma. And those were 2 guys who hired him. And this is the first time he's worked with an AD who hasn't hired him before. So kind of building that relationship, because Lincoln Riley's a good coach and he's going to probably feel like the people are going to be interested in him. So trying to keep him at USC will be and building that relationship with Lincoln Riley will be a big thing for her as well. So to me, those are the most significant priorities, and also just keeping USC out of the news cycle in terms of bad news and controversy and stuff.
Yeah, there has been a fair amount of that in recent years, and we'll see whether or not they can move ahead without it. What about some of these other schools joining the Big Ten? Give us just a little bit of a thumbnail on football season as we head in. UCLA, we know they started to get better under Chip Kelly. Dante Moore is a really highly regarded quarterback prospect. Is it your belief that he will be the starter this year for the Bruins?
I think he'll be the starter at some point. I could see them opening with Colin Schlee, the Kent State transfer, to start the year. I could also see them going with Dante Moore to start the year. The schedule is light at the start of the year. It's Coastal Carolina, North Carolina Central, San Diego State. So if you want to transition into freshman, that's kind of the perfect slate to do it. And I think they could be really good this year. Just the schedule sets up nicely for them. And they always do good work in the transfer portal. Carson Steele this year, the running back from Ball State, who could probably be the bell cow for them this year. J. Michael Sturdivant, a receiver they got from Cal. Kyle Ford, a receiver they got from USC. Chip Kelly, I know he gets criticized a lot for recruiting, but you can't really criticize him for the work he does in the portal. And I think he's finally stabilized that program. They've been improving year by year. And I'm kind of interested to see. I think they might be getting slept on a little this year just because the schedule's nice and they did good work in the portal.
What about Oregon? We know about Bo Nix at quarterback. The issue with the Ducks, it feels like there's kind of a common theme with these Pac-12 teams that are joining the Big Ten. The issue with the Ducks is defense. Is it your sense that they will be better on that side of the ball this year?
It's tough because the same with USC. It's like can they be worse? Like they only have room to go up. And Oregon added South Carolina transfer Jordan Birch, who was a former 5-star on the defensive line. And they already have a good defensive end there, Brent Dorlus. So that gives them 2 bookends on the defensive line that could really, change the game for them. When you talk about playing a team like USC, you're going to need edge rushers, and they have them. And they brought in Evan Williams from Fresno State last year. The secondary really struggled, especially on third downs. And so to get an established leader like Evan Williams is a positive, and the linebacker they got from Iowa, Justin Jacobs, so that every level of the defense, they've added some pieces that they needed. And I think that'll give them a boost. So we'll see about the offense, new coordinator. Kenny Dillingham did a great job with Bo Nix. Will Wilstein be able to do the same? That's a major question. They lost some on the offensive line. They have so much talent, and they recruit so well. You'd think that talent will win out at some point.
Finally, want to ask you about Washington. Great first year with Kalen DeBoer. Big Ten fans know all about Michael Penix, who, of course, transferred from Indiana. He is a Heisman candidate heading into this year. Again, kind of big picture for fans who haven't followed Washington before. What should they know about the Huskies as they prepare maybe to follow them a little more this year?
The receivers are excellent. Rome Odunze and Jalen McMillan are probably, I think they're the two best receivers in the Pac-12, and they're on the same team. And so this is a deep receiving group. There's more than just them. They have some good secondary players in that receiving group who are good too. And the offense is Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer run a good scheme, and we saw that last year as the season went on, and when they upset Oregon. They won 11 games, won 11-2, I think. So it's a good scheme. Penix is comfortable in it. He has the receivers to be explosive. They just lost running back Cam Davis, but last year they had a good stable of backs. So I know it'll hurt, but I still think they'll be fine over the long run. It's the major question, like the others we've talked about, is the defense going to be good enough? They struggled in some games. They got upset by Arizona State last year when they gave 40-something points. And that's something that kept them out of the Pac-12 title game and maybe a potential playoff spot. So is the defense going to improve, and can the secondary get better, and can the run defense get better? Will be the question. And their schedule's a bit harder this year. They face Utah, they face USC. They didn't play those teams last year, but that game on in early November with USC and Washington will be a shootout and a fun one to watch for sure. It's going to be a fun year for those teams who are about to transition to the Big Ten.
Four really good teams. Looking forward to seeing how they do this year, and of course looking forward to welcoming them into our conference a year from now. Antonio Morales, thank you so much for your insights and your time. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having me.
Tonight, women's volleyball returns to the Big Ten Network, a huge doubleheader. The Big Ten Big 12 Challenge. First, you got Devin Robinson, number 2 Wisconsin, squaring off with 15th ranked Baylor. Then it's the reigning Conference Player of the Year, Taylor Landfair, in 7th ranked Minnesota against TCU. Coverage begins tonight, 5:30 Eastern. It's powered by Unleaded 88, only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Mentioned at the top, there are actually 2 games in the Big Ten prior to Saturday. Next week, you got the big Thursday night clash, Nebraska going to Minnesota. Matt Rule's debut, that one's primetime on Fox. The next night, FS1 has Michigan State hosting Central Michigan. We're going to talk a lot about these games coming up next week, but let's just dive just on the surface what interests you about each one of these games. We'll start with the conference battle. Rule's debut against PJ Fleck and the Gophers.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities. There really are, River. I mean, both these coaches are program builders, and program builders at a pretty fast pace. Knowing Matt Rule from when he was at Temple and I was at Pitt, and obviously PJ for all the years that I was at Fox, you know, both these guys' culture of their football team is probably as important to them as anything when they talk about building the program. They'll use the word culture of how we practice and how we meet and the coaches and how we treat players. And I think so you're getting both of this you're getting it from Nebraska, and obviously PJ has it established at Minnesota. I think from a football standpoint, we all know that Nebraska's quarterback is going to be Jeff Sims. Jeff Sims from Georgia Tech is a phenomenal athlete. I have thought, and I watched him, I thought he was as dangerous running the football as he was throwing the football. And now, you say, how is Minnesota going to handle that? I mean, Joe Rossi, the defense coordinator for Minnesota, is good as there is in the country. And he proves it every week. He'll have a good scheme. Those kids are into it. I've sat in his meetings. I mean, he knows what he's doing, and the players buy in. He's got smart, tough guys. So that'll be a good matchup. The one that's going to be interesting for me, you look at no Tanner Morgan, no Mo Ibrahim, right? Both gone. They were kind of the backbone of that offense for the most part. So now you've got new running backs, new quarterback, and the defense. Here's the point I want to make. They're going to run as 3-3-5 defense at Nebraska. And having faced this defense when I was at Pitt and they ran it at West Virginia with Rich Rodriguez, it's kind of like an offense that runs the triple option, the old Navy that ran the wishbone, Oklahoma. You don't see it all year. You don't practice against it. It's an unconventional defense. People are 3-4 or people are the 4-2-5. This is so unusual, and a lot falls on your quarterback to get you in the right play. In other words, you have to be able to go up to it, and you have to be able to, you see it, who's blitzing, who's not. It could be a safety, it could be inside linebacker, outside linebacker. The quarterback's got to get you in the right place. So that's going to be the biggest challenge for Minnesota.
And Sims was mistake prone, has been throughout his career, so we'll see if he can shed that.
Yep.
Give me 30 seconds on Michigan State. We've already talked about the quarterbacks. What else?
You know what, Mel, this is not an easy game for Mel because you're not going to be happy. He's trying to work through the quarterbacks forever, and the fans, the alumni, confidence is the word. After last year, he needs to come out this week, and they need to be a disciplined football team, a clean football team from a turnover standpoint, and they got to win. And if he wins by a field goal, it'll be a win for him. Check the box, but it won't be real good for the fans and the students. They're going to want more, and they're going to want it faster. I don't know if they're ready for that right now. We'll find out.
Interested to see their defense. It has got to be better than it was a year ago, and frankly, than it was 2 years ago.
Well, if they're rotating quarterbacks, the defense is going to have to carry them. That's a great point.
It is time for our Big Five. We've counted down the top 5 players at every position in the conference. We're concluding with the safeties today. You have given me access to your list, which I appreciate. So let's start with number 5, Bo Braid of Maryland.
Yeah, well, anytime you got a safety that's a leading tackler on the team, he's a guy that you need to recognize. And if Maryland's going to improve this year, they're going to have to do it, in my opinion, on defense. We know they'll score points, and he will be your defensive leader. I look for Bo to have a big year.
That defensive efficiency went from 88th to 18th in the country last year.
Huge.
He was a big part of that. Iowa's got a really good secondary, and I know you really like Quinn Schulte at number 4.
I do, and I respect their coaches so much. And Phil Parker, the defensive coordinator, he said the guy missed 3 tackles the entire year. I mean, so this guy is as solid as they come. He was a walk-on player, and Phil he references Brent Garrison, is it Greenwood, who played there for 4-year starter for him, who was a walk-on also. So this guy is an outstanding player. Wherever they put him, he's a guy that's so dependable they can count on him. That's why they're top 10 in the defense every year.
Number 3, Cam Allen at Purdue.
Yeah, Cam Allen does it all. I say does it all, I mean tackles for losses, forced fumbles, sacks. And with Ryan Walters now, with his secondary experience, I would really expect him to improve this year. He's going to get a head coach that's kind of his specialty is secondary, and I think it'll just add to this guy's value, not just to their team, but down the road. Got
to cut down on those big plays that they gave up a year ago, but a whole new defensive staff, as you said. Number 2, Rod Moore in Michigan.
Yeah, when you look at him, you might say, well, how did you pull him and put him at the number 2 category? I looked at his production, and when you look at the last 3 games of the season, River, when you look at Ohio State, you look at the Big Ten championship game, you look at the playoff game, that's when this guy played the best. And whenever you can get players that show up and play at the highest level they can play at in big games like he did, that gets your attention.
Held 6 opponents to 10 points or fewer last year. And then number 1, we were just talking about the Gophers, Tyler Nubin, a really good player.
Yeah, really good player. He should be a first, second day draft pick in the National Football League. He has all the athletic skills that you're really looking for because he can defend the run as equally with the pass. So Joe Rossi does a great job of putting him in position where he can help that defense. And year in and year out, I mean, this kid has showed up big.
Got some preseason hype this year. One of the 10 players to watch is voted on by the media at Big Ten Media Days. Thank you so much for watching us here on Big Ten Today. We'll crank it up again next week, and we will have actual games. We'll be in game week. Cannot wait to break it all down. Take care. Have a great weekend.